Hey everyone, thanks for coming. My name is Thomas Slattery, and I'll be talking about my thesis project called Aura. It's an environmental-based, user-driven narrative created virtually, which is obviously a video game. So first, a little background about me. I come out of the comics industry. I worked for Comixology for 4 years, which is a digital comics distributor. I've been creating and distributing my own work. Written, sometimes collaborated for several years. I worked for Comixology for 4 years until they were bought by Amazon and I was laid off. After that, I transitioned into working for film, generally a lot of independent film. I was a set dresser, storyboard artist, general art department, whatever they needed. This is a still from a movie called Jack of the Red Hearts, which came out, that actually had a pretty good release last year, but all the drawings on the walls were mine. I helped build the set. There's a movie called The Pastor that I don't even know if it came out, but they forced me to be an actor in that one, and I can't find a clip of it, otherwise you would have seen it. So I was working in film for a couple of years. I really got this itch to build out my skill set a little further and just become better at creating my own content, which brought me to the MFA Visual Narrative program, where I started moving beyond print and pushing beyond print and comics and things like that. I wanted to use sound, I wanted to do animation, things like that, to see where I could push my storytelling. This clip I'm about to play is from a piece called Simulacra that I did last year, which got into a juried exhibition at SVA and was also in the ASIFA East animation competition in the student category. It's based on Jean Baudrillard's work on the hyper-real, talking about Disneyland. So what I was trying to do here is really push the colors and the sound to reflect the idea of Baudrillard's philosophies of hyper-reality. So I used a robotic voice and really oversaturated artificial colors. So here's a clip of that.
Creating a tiny little world of their own. This, I thought, is where dreams live. Memories. The exposed machinery of a robotic pirate creaks and peeks out of his rear. Mickey and Minnie on the smoke break. My eyes wide open in shock as my imaginary friends removed their oversized heads and revealed the reality inside.
So following that, well, that was, first on that, it was kind of a huge step forward for me as far as storytelling out of print and using different elements to get my point across. Last year, we were invited to do a mapping project at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I chose this room, again, I think coming from a set dresser and having that kind of sensibility. I wanted to do one of the recreation rooms. I kind of approached it a little bit more abstractly. It wasn't necessarily a direct map. I was looking at how this room used to be in London in the 17th century. They built a road through this building, so then moved it to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And I was thinking about how it exists in time and space, how it has existed. So I set up a camera and I filmed people interacting with it in the present day. As a museum, they would just kind of wander in and out of the room, nod, and kind of move on. I layered rotoscoped animations over it to reference the previous tenants and how it used to be, what it was. So it's just looking at time, what this place was and is, how it exists, and how people interact with it as a museum. This clip that I'm showing is actually, I kept editing this after the Met project, so this is actually a little more recent than that. But I was playing with the layering effects to really get the point across on here. And that's some ambient white noise from the Met. And always still doing print work and writing, doing comics, and comics are a great place for me to actually work on real storytelling. You can make them pretty quickly. I can work out narrative structure. This piece on the left was from a book called Jane. It was a 12-page story, which was felt really good to execute what I think is my strongest writing so far. I'm also exploring zines. This was a tribute I did to Prince. It was going to be an ongoing thing, but I actually stopped it when he died because it was just too sad. Which brings us to my thesis project, Aura. So the plot of Aura, it's about a neuroscientist named Dr. Theo Aphasian. Due to his life's struggles, his history, his parents, he's very cold and cut off. He doesn't believe in relationships. He also sees technology making us more isolated. We're more connected now than ever before, but people feel less connected. And he, because of the person that he is, sees that as a positive thing. He thinks we can really just push it beyond that. We don't need each other anymore. So as a neuroscientist, he starts developing therapies to kind of ease up dependence and make people more independent. He does this through sound wave technology, which is inspired by Dr. John C. Lilly, who was the inspiration for Ken Russell's film Altered States. He's famous for isolation tank experiments, sound wave stuff, psychotropic drugs, taking psychotropic drugs and going into an isolation tank. He would do these things and try to communicate with God and things like that. But he also famously inspired Echo the dolphin through his dolphin communication practices. He fed LSD to dolphins. And but he was experimenting with how they use sound, how they use sonar, and he invented something called a Lilly wave, which a lot of people think could be a mind control device. So this is the stuff that I was researching when I got into Aura. So this is the stuff that Dr. Aphasian is using to kind of, people listen to these sounds to ease themselves out of their struggles and move on to the next step for themselves. The other thing that I was looking at is called binaural brain entrainment, which is basically one pulse plays in one ear and a different one plays in one in the right and one in the left. And you can kind of set it to a different frequency. So there's like alpha wave, theta wave, beta wave, and the two sounds entrain your brain waves to mimic whatever frequency they're at. So you can actually induce the feeling of meditation, sleep, deep concentration, depending on the frequencies. So I actually made one of these for my game that runs through it. So here, to see what happens to people when they're playing it, just to see an experiment. So these are my character sketches, oddly enough, because it's a first-person game where you come in after the story has kind of taken place. You don't see them in the game. But so I really wanted to fully flesh everything out, so they're fully designed. They exist. So we have Dr. Aphasian on the right. In the middle, I have another character who he kind of develops a somewhat romantic relationship, so I needed someone to challenge him and kind of push on his beliefs. So we can get these like changes and depth out of it. And then on the left is Reverend Markle, who is actually a counterpoint to Dr. Aphasian. He thinks he can use this kind of technology to bring unity as the kind of end to escape the way he thinks humanity is going. They're both kind of extremists, so it's kind of a little flip side thing going on. This is a visualization that I created of the actual narrative. So it's the top line is all the key points and events that have to happen. Because of the way I structured the game, you come into it after the fact and explore the space and figure out what happened. So all of this has already finished by the time you enter the video game. The second little image is Dr. Aphasian's emotional state and feelings about humanity going up and down. And then the bottom is the intensity of his research as it gets more and more out of control and he loses control of it. So the reason I decided to make this a video game was this concept that I could put someone into the environment, into the shoes of a character, and just create empathy. So, and the other interesting thing is too, in a first-person game, I could switch who you are at different times. So actually the first part of the game, you play as a teenage Dr. Aphasian and you re-experience one of his memories. And I think that really helps lay the ground. You get to know this character really well. And it really just fills in all the emotional blanks that are gonna come up later. Since I had the full narrative built out, I had to basically retrofit the story to be a first-person narrative. So first you play as Aphasian, and then you get another title card, and then you start the game properly as someone investigating his laboratory after a huge accident has happened. because of his work. So you come in, you explore things, you're going through the space and you find documents, you find recordings, and you put together this full story. So I originally wanted this to be a virtual reality experience, and that was A, because I really wanted to, I thought that was cool, and B, thematically, it made a lot of sense because it's kind of about a little bit of this isolation through technology. I liked that for virtual reality, you would have to play it completely alone. You know, you put on this helmet, so no matter what you're doing, you can't be around other people. And I think putting you into the space really just like, it makes you feel very isolated, and then I can, you know, play weird sound waves and manipulate you while you're in there. I actually got it functioning on virtual reality, but it was not a very pleasant experience. There was a lot of motion sickness going on. So that went out the window. I also really, I think this project has a little bit more in common, not so much with traditional video games, but with immersive theater. Theoretically, I could build this set, create all of these items in real space, and it would pretty much run exactly the same way that it does virtually. The benefit of doing it virtually is that it's free and I can do whatever I want, and I don't need to be in a physical space. I can take it anywhere. But the problem with doing it virtually is that I had no idea what I was doing. I had to teach myself. I used this program called Blender 3D. It was my first attempt doing any kind of 3D rendering. Blender is an amazing program. It is free to download. It's super powerful, and I started to get the hang of it. These are microscopes that show up in the lab. I was able to build the environments after watching some tutorials. So it all started coming together here in Blender. And then the next step was using a program called Unity 3D, which is a really powerful video game building engine that is also really hard to learn. So in Unity, there's a huge learning curve for me. I had to figure out you have to assign physics, you have to say what these things are made of, the first time I tried to play, I put my player in there and I fell through the floor, and you can just like look up and watch your environment like floating away into space forever. These were some desks that I built. They didn't want to stay in the same space with each other, so they started throwing themselves around. So after a while, I got the hang of it. A lot of thanks to my mentor, Robbie Tilton. He works in virtual reality for Google, and I came to him knowing nothing, and he was really patient with me. So another thing with building a narrative the way that I did is I have to figure out how much autonomy the player has and how much control they have over the narrative. Technically in my game, if you know where the keys are to open the doors, you could run through the whole space and finish the game without learning a single thing about the narrative. So it's kind of designed, I don't have a lot of puzzles because I didn't want to be too video gamey, so the only thing you have to do is find key cards to open doors. And the whole point of that is to keep you in a space long enough that you do get enough narrative. You know, you'll be looking around for these cards, but you're going to find documents, you're going to find recordings, you're going to, if you want to, you could spend hours and get more of the story, but, I kind of want it so whether you like it or not, you're going to get some. So. So one thing that I did to create a little bit of a visual and narrative consistency was different items would pertain to different narrative threads. So anytime you saw a phone with a red light flashing on it and you click on that, it's going to be a voicemail from the character Bucky. Anytime you see a voice recorder, that's going to be a note, a memo, a journal entry that Theo recorded for himself. And anytime you see a folder, that's going to be a document that's related to the company he works for or another kind of paper document. So that's another nice thing about working in a game and virtual stuff is you can create these rules that people figure out. Even if it's subconsciously, they'll get the hang of realizing that these items mean different things and they kind of know what to expect, which goes a long way in getting the story across. Unity is a really great program for for designing these spaces, you can control all the lightings, you can add fog for effect, you can change the color based on the color of the sky outside and how much impact that has on the interior, which was hugely important because the environment is like 80% of this story. So it had to feel cold, it had to feel abandoned, something bad just happened here. So Unity was a really great program for that. The other really nice thing is that sound design is really flexible, and since the experiments are sound-based in this program, in this game, I used a lot of public domain stuff and warped it to the way that I needed to, but you can assign sounds to different objects and have the volume change depending on how close you are, and you can change the effect of that, which is another way to guide the player through the space. If something's making like a weird kind of beeping noise or something, maybe they'll be drawn to it and get another piece of information out of it. And with that, I have a short little teaser trailer of the game that I made that we can now watch. And finally, once it was complete, we had the opportunity to build an installation for it, which I was like, finally, I get to like build a space, which I really love doing. I love designing it. I like that it got to be a little bit of an extension to the story in its own way. It even does a little bit of fleshing out the way I could use set dressing in that situation, and it's right downstairs. So going forward, I'm still looking to develop this story and maybe use different media, but right now, that is Aura. Thank you. So she asked if I gotten a response of if the binaural beat that I put in the game is affecting anyone, but I haven't told anyone it's there who's played it, so I'm not sure. Oh, yeah, he asked if I've done any of the experimental isolation experiments that I've done research on. I would love to. I haven't had the chance yet. I've always wanted to. Yes. So she asked if I have tested the story on my fellow students and if people are getting the story, whether they like it or not. Especially since the installation has been done there, I've watched people play it, and I was really afraid that people not knowing anything at all coming in would not get any story out of it at all. And people, I asked them when they come out what they thought of it and what they thought was happening, and a lot of the time they don't know that it's mine. But yeah, totally, the people are really getting the story just from spending time with it and poking around a little bit. Did they delve deeper with the objects as the narrative goes on? Yeah, I think, I don't know, it's interesting because it's not linear, so it's not like the narrative really does go on. You're kind of putting it together and not necessarily in order. So it's not as much of the narrative going on, but it's more like the more time you spend, the more you're gonna get. You mean like how did I decide what I want the person to experience of the larger linear narrative? That was mostly dictated, I think, from when I started building the space. I kind of just was thinking what part of this larger story is going to make the most sense on this environmental level. Also, it was a question of when I was planning it, and I was a little worried about how much I was capable of doing. That was an issue too. Can I build 30 rooms? Should I build 3 rooms? So it also came down to how much I could do, how much time I had, and literally how much I could cram in there. Mapping the sound out, I think, also came in when I was building the space too. But that was early on. I really wanted to do sound design, though. That was something really original. I think even the first time I pitched it, I was talking about that. Because the story and the experiments are so based on sound, I really wanted I really wanted to make a sound, like even if I did a physical installation or something like that, sound mapping for that installation would have been really important too. So yeah, that was actually a early thing that I really wanted to work for the story. Thank you.